Scene 4, take 1.
I moved here from San Francisco when I turned 21. So I was sitting on the floor and going through the LA Weekly. I was looking through the ads, and I saw this one, American Hotel, $250 a month. So I moved into my little 10 by 14 room with the bathroom just adjacent there in the hallway, and no kitchen, and all of the glorious people who lived here. I lived on the top floor. I would look out the window and I would see people bursting out of the back door of Al's. And I was just like, wow, I'm never going to go into that bar. And pretty soon I was working in the bar. I was sober, by the way. I moved here a year clean and sober. So I was the sober bartender that would cut people off when they'd had too much and give them a free water or coffee. It totally stunk of rotting beer. The drain was never clean enough. The neon was gorgeous, and the people were great. Everybody who came there was happy. How could you not love it? When I moved in, there was paint on the floor and the walls were painted. It wasn't much, but I had come from living in squats in London, and I had lived with roommates in San Francisco in old buildings. It wasn't this troubled place. It was just this creative hub. It was very edgy still when I lived down here. Your battery got stolen at least once a year, unless the guys that were on the street knew you and kind of liked you. Most of the crackheads that were on the street liked me, so my battery was only stolen once the whole time I lived here. I did have a chicken while I lived in the hotel. She was beautiful. She was black and brown with iridescent feathers, and her name was Coco because she started out brown. And I found out that she was a Georgia giant. I had a cat named Fang, and we would have cat and chicken races down the hall. It was a melting pot of chaos where creation begins and the flower grows, George mopped the floors, and he kept the hotel clean, and he dumped the trash. I always liked George, and I believe that George liked me. I was in George's favor generally, which is not the case for many of the people who lived here. However, one time I must have rubbed him the wrong way. I was standing in front of my door on the 4th floor talking to him, and I pissed him off so bad that he took his hand and he just smacked me across the hallway. And I was in shock. This man had what I believe they call in old-time boxing the heavy hand. His hand was like a giant piece of lead. And then he put his hands on his hips and he chewed me out about whatever it was I'd done. This was a very old man. He was here when I got here. He was still here when I moved out. He was the caretaker of the hotel. And you did what George said. If he told you close your door, you closed your door. And that was George. He was our example of old school. There was nobody more old school than George. So you kind of needed to have old George that mops the floors and keeps the peace. And George had to go in for an operation. And he was not at the hotel for, I think, a week. And it turned out he had passed some gallstones. Apparently this is extremely painful, but he came back and he went right back to mopping the floors and putting things away in the little nook next to my room and walking up and down the stairs because there's no elevator in the American hotel. That was a great relief that we had George back. We had that moment where everyone had to think about mortality, which is not what you think about in the American hotel. Al's Bar was a place where the muse lived. The bar was known worldwide. People in Europe knew about Al's Bar. It was amazing. There were bands that played there, and there were bands that came out of bands that played there. There was a wonderful band. The leader was Brian Grillo. It was called Lockup. Brian played at Al's Bar as a regular. His guitarist's name was Tom Morello. One night, Loretta and we were standing up on the top floor of the hotel right outside my room, and this outrageous throbbing sound started coming up through the light well. So we went down into the bar, and I saw there on the stage my friend Tom Morello. And Rage Against the Machine was doing their sound check for No Talent Night at Al's Bar. They were doing a practice show before they went out gigging. They were singing Killing in the Name Of. Not only did people start feeding in from the hotel, but they just started coming in from the street. And pretty soon the room was full and everybody's heads were just bobbing. That was the actual beginning of Rage Against the Machine, taking it out into the public. Lizzie booked all of the bands at Al's Bar. If you wanted somebody to figure out who's up and coming, you need this girl on your side. It's amazing how many little bands she booked when nobody knew who they were, and they just shot up big on the charts. Lizzie and I went down to the Atomic Cafe, and Beck was playing, and she was just going to check out Beck at the time to see if he could play at Al's Bar. The whole time we were there, he never actually played. He spent the whole time trying to sound check, just sitting on the stage with his guitar and his amp. Lizzie was really getting a kick out of it because she knew she was going to book him. Years later, Beck actually became huge. Beck, by that time, went from spending the whole time playing with his amplifier to just blooming as this kind of young Mick Jagger with rosy red cheeks. It was a total transformation from this little shy young man who played, and he'd come up to the bar at Al's Bar and ask for a water or a Coke, and he was really quiet. I could barely hear him when he talked. He was so sweet. Scott Whalen and his band, Mighty Joe Young, played at Al's Bar. And they lived around the corner. They had a big fancy loft. One night, I'm driving up the street after the show, and Scott's walking back to his loft with his band, and he runs over to my car, and he's like, "Do you think Lizzie liked us? Do you think Lizzie liked us?" And he was so worried, and he was so humble, and he had no idea how talented he was. And then they went to New York, and they changed from a ska band to what we know today as Stone Temple Pilots, and the rest is history. This neighborhood really was just this hotel and a bunch of warehouses and a bunch of artists and a bunch of street people. They didn't have anything to lose. The hotel and the bar itself still represented that freedom. When the parking meters went in, zoop, they got cut off with a chainsaw. When people came in to take over and they didn't share with the community as far as the film industry went, they got music blasting out the window to ruin their shot until they treated the neighborhood with respect. It's different now, but look, it's going the way I would want it. They put a bowl of water out for your dog, and people are sitting out on the sidewalk now, drinking their coffee and eating breakfast. It's a beautiful thing. I had a dream about the American Hotel. The inside looked entirely different. It was beautiful. Some people may actually still have been living in here. It was about art still, and creativity, but the outside was still the American Hotel. It was just like it had transformed into the future. We just have to keep the real art here, though. That can't go, the hotel can't go. This is the heart right here. You can't lose the heart.
Cut.